Faces and chapters from the Central European legal heritage. Welcome to the Central European Legal Insights, the podcast series introducing the professors of the Central European Academy at the University of Miskolc through insightful conversations with Judit, Varga.
What is the mission, first of all? That is the reinterpretation of Central European scientific cooperation and re-establishment of this.
So it's not a comparison without a reason. It has a very special goal, how to make the legal systems better, how to find good solutions, and how to develop ourselves.
We are trying to promote our own national topics, approaches, and so on and so on. That this is the gap-filling mission of the Academy.
First and most important thing is to rediscover ourselves and to rediscover the Central European connections, all that we share in common.
So welcome to the Central European Legal Insights, the podcast series of the Central European Academy at the University of Miskolc. My name is Judit Varga, and as I work as a senior mentor at the Academy, and I will be hosting this podcast series. And throughout the episodes, we are going to present the faces and the personalities of the Central European Professors Network. And we try, throughout this conversation, to bring you closer to the very rich legal heritage of Central Europe. And also, we would like to explore the stories and the ideas beyond science in Central Europe, which connect us. So I would like to welcome my friends and colleagues from the Academy. Dr. Katarzyna Zombory, she is the research director at the Central European Academy, and Professor Ede Szilágyi from the University of Miskolc, also an old friend and colleague, and he is the strategic director at the Academy. I'm very grateful to you, the colleagues, that you actually took the adventure together with me to present the achievements of the Central European Academy, and also you take part in making more visible our results so that also the wider world can get acquainted with the achievements of the Central European region when it comes to the legal heritage. So let's get down to the introduction, and I would like to address Ede, the strategic director of the Academy, to tell about the Academy itself. What is the Central European Academy?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation, for this opportunity. I am honored to be here. I think that Central European Academy means not only one thing, but numerous meanings can be mentioned. However, if I may, I would like to focus on the network, because the Central European Academy itself represents a network of people, and they represent a wide variety of countries, of age groups, also formation, also topics. As to the countries, the Central European Academy represents more than 16 countries. I use this for more than 16 countries because in the core of the Central European Academy there are 16 countries, 8 countries of the 8 member states of the European Union, and 8 countries as candidate countries. However, sometimes we also involve other professors from other countries. I also referred that we represent different age groups. Of course, we have senior researchers, also have young researchers in this project. As to the topics, typically we try to present topics which are important from a Central European perspective. At international level, it's not so easy to represent and promote our topics, but in Central European Academy, that is in our focus. I also referred that the forms of cooperation, some of the professors, researchers, they are here as members of different research groups. The young researchers, they are here typically in Budapest and or in Miskolc, and they pursue their research, their PhD research, for example, in our project. However, not only researchers but also reviewers are involved in our project, because in the science, review is essential. For me, the network.
We are
CEA,
going to talk about the network and the people of the Central European Academy a bit later. But if you look at the website of the Central European Academy, you find all the facts and data about the establishment. But now I turn to Katarzyna, and I would like to ask her what gap is it filling in Central Europe, and if you could just tell us about the story, the start, and the establishment, and some data and structure of the Central European Academy.
With great pleasure, and as my colleague Ede mentioned, Central European Academy has many meanings and many different aspects, and one of them is the network of people. That's the, I would say, main aspect also for me. But if we think about the formal side, I would like to tell a few words about what it is, what the Academy is from the, let's say, formalistic point of view. Considering that aspect, it's a classic research institute. It is an institute established by a university.
Which university?
The University of Miskolc.
Our beloved Miskolc University.
Based on the provisions of Hungarian law. And it has a very, very special goal. Namely, it has a public function. That public function is determined in the Act, that is the Act on the foundations performing public functions. And for the University of Miskolc and for the Central European Academy, these public functions include mainly carrying out international comparative legal research, developing legal cooperation, as well as running and establishing the network of researchers, educational network covering the countries of Central European region. So it's important, I think, to also think about that aspect, that it has a quite specific public goal, public function, which is also determining the mission of the Central European Academy. The Academy started its activities in 2022, at the beginning of January. And
does it have a special legal entity?
Yes, it has its own separate legal entity. However, it is strictly connected to the University of Miskolc, as it is established by the university. As I mentioned.
So we can say that the Academy is carrying out tasks which are actually commissioned by a law to carry out these public functions, which is, among other things, to build the Central European Professors Network, which I think one of the core elements of the Academy.
Exactly.
Yep.
Let's warm up a bit with personal questions, because I know both of you. Of course, I know you already for quite some time, already from my university ages. And please tell our listeners about your story. How did you get to CEA? How did you get acquainted with the mission? How it started, your story with the Central European Academy?
First of all, now I support Central European Academy as a professor of the University of Miskolc and as a strategy director of the Central European Academy. But my devotion to Central Europe and the Central European cooperation derives from my childhood. If I can start this story, and
it's going to be long.
Yeah, but I try to present it in a shorter form. I was born in Romania and Transylvania during the Ceausescu dictatorship, and that period of history, it was not a nice period. I was part of the national minorities. I was a member of the national minorities as Hungarian. And as a child, my experience is about the cooperation among the Central European nations. It was not as good. However, it was inspiring for me. I consider the 20th century time as lost opportunities for our nations, for the Central European peoples. And I hope that in the 21st century somehow we can develop and improve this cooperation. And I'm really glad that in the framework of Central European Academy I can serve this mission. And it was also a pleasure for me to meet people from other countries who are similarly open for this cooperation.
Yeah, I can say that based on what you just said, you formed the backbone actually for the strategic networking activities of Central European Academy, because thanks to your networking, today we are in touch with more than 200 professors from among the region. So it's a huge achievement. And now I understand your motivation, your mission based on this background.
Thank you so much. I have to emphasize that the CEA, it is a team. And therefore, there are so many people who are devoted to this mission, and their efforts is necessary to achieve our goals. You notice the 200 professors. We already involved 200 professors in our professors network, but I have to emphasize that taking into account our other project, typically in a year there are 400 professors and researchers in our project. Therefore, 400 professors and researchers per year, that is the whole amount.
It's hard to avoid with those results always to talk about the numbers, but they are coming later in this episode. Yes, thank you, Professor Szilágyi, thank you, Ede. Katarzyna, you are quite unique at the CEA because you started your life in Poland and ended up in Hungary. You speak fluent Hungarian, which is actually amazing. So please tell me how did you come to Hungary? How did you come across Miskolc University? And of course, how did you end up in CEA?
It would be quite a long story. I will try to cut it short. But it's almost 15 years that I've been living here in Hungary. I came here as a PhD student for an exchange program from the Visegrad Fund Scholarship. I studied at the Pázmány Péter University at that time. And I must say that the choice of destination and of the university was not by accident. During my university years in Poland, I volunteered at many cultural events and festivals. And at that time, I met several Hungarian people as well. And they were great ambassadors of their country. They introduced me to Hungarian culture, to Hungarian history, also to Hungarian language. And I found especially the language so unique and so beautiful and so different than from all the other languages that I've heard, that I've just decided to learn it. And somehow I managed to do it. I don't know how. And after completing my law degree in Poland, after doing my PhD, I moved to Hungary.
Which university in Poland?
The Maria Curie-Skłodowska University in Lublin. Yes, I married here in Hungary. I live here in Budapest.
You have beautiful daughters?
I have 2 daughters, yes, 2 bilingual and bicultural daughters. And I live in Budapest, which I consider to be one of the most beautiful and welcoming cities that I've ever been to. And as for the Central European Academy, I serve as a research director. But at the beginning, I contributed to the establishment of the academy.
Yeah, you were acting.
I was the acting
Director General.
Director General. That's true.
In the early years of the academy.
It's a great privilege.
But it was a heroic job to do something or to establish something which never existed before, with all the structures, with all the personal and strategic decisions. So thank you, Katarzyna, for being with us. And speaking of children, actually, Ede has also beautiful children, 3. He is a father of 3. The Central European Academy, I can evidence this, is a very family-friendly working atmosphere at the same time. Well, now let's go into the content, which is actually the core element of this podcast, to tell European listeners about the idea and the mission of the Central European Academy. And I would like to ask Ede to dive into the world of of our everyday work. And as a girl from Diósgyőr, as a girl from Eastern Hungary, I'm very impressed about the logo of the academy, especially about the core elements. We can see 2 lions, a sun, a column, a castle, which is actually obviously the castle of Diósgyőr. Actually, I grew up at the feet of this beautiful castle, and it just make me proud to look at this logo when I see it on beautifully printed and coated books, which actually already reached many big European libraries and universities. So, of course, the logo is just one thing, and you can touch upon in your answer.
I think the logo represents, this kind of a mission. But what is the mission, first of all? My colleague Katarzyna Zombory, she's already referred to some elements of the mission. That is the reinterpretation of Central European scientific cooperation and re-establishment of this. We have to emphasize that now we refer to science, but the CEA is especially connected to jurisprudence, to law, to tell the truth. However, in some of our projects, we also cooperate with other fields of sciences. But the core element is law. Therefore, when I say that we reinterpret and reestablish, it's especially as to the jurisprudence and the law. And it's also really important to identifying the Central European topics. Maybe somebody can consider it that it's absolutely obvious, but sometimes not, because in the last decades we focused on Western side of Europe, which is normal, absolutely. We consider them as a kind of role model. We try to copy the democracy and the capitalism, how to operate it, and so on and so on. Therefore, it's absolutely normal. And in a given sense, sometimes we forgot to realize our own interest and our own approaches. I think that Central European Academy promote and support this recognition. And after that, also the thematization of our topics into the international scientific world.
You mean our goal is to thematize the scholar discourse also in Western Europe, so that they are talking about us in a way how we would like to see them to talk about us?
Yes, and that's my short answer. It's really important to represent our approaches, topics, in this way the interest of our society at scientific level, of course. And you referred to this logo. And if
yes,
can I a little bit, because it's not a coincidence that you can recognize this kind of symbols in our logo. We try to determine the role of Miskolc. We recognize the values of Miskolc in this situation. For example, the castle of Diósgyőr. It has a long history. 800 years. However, as the peak of this history, it was the time of Louis the Great, who was also king of Hungary and king of Poland. In a given
personal union.
Yeah,
yes.
In a given sense, it also represents this form of cooperation between the nations. And also this time of Louis the Great, it was also a fantastic time of diplomacy. Because at that time, Diósgyőr Castle also served as a kind of framework of this cooperation.
Yeah, if I'm not wrong, actually they signed the peace treaty with Venice.
That is the point, right? But we think that the castle can represent also this framework of cooperation. And you also refer to the lions.
So the castle in the logo refers to this.
To this secular word in this Central European cooperation. And as to the lions, they are from the coat of arms of the order monk order of St. Paul.
So the Hungarian monk order.
Yes, you're right, because this is the monkhood order of fathers established in Hungary. However, later they also established monasteries in other Central European countries, in other countries, and in their history there was a sorrowful period, the time of occupation of a given part of Hungary by the Turkey, by the Ottoman Empire. Thank you so much. That is the exact phenomenon name. And at that time, they were forced to leave Hungary, and they transferred the center of the order into Poland. And I think it also represents a really interesting and spiritual characteristic of this potential cooperation. And in Miskolc, or close to Miskolc, there was also a monastery, Saint Lélek, for example, if I can pronounce the yeah, you are right.
Holy Spirit.
And it's really interesting because given sources, they mention that the architects of monastery in Saint Lélek and Castle of Diósgyőr in the given period of time of history, they were the same persons, and the raw materials used.
Okay,
there
so
are similarities. There
is
is a kind of connection. Yeah,
you're
right. Yes, you're right. Therefore, everything about Central Europe,
architecture, and also with because we have to tell the listeners, our audience, that the very basis of the cooperation of the Central European cooperation within the academy is based on a very strong Hungarian-Polish axis. Ede, would you like also to talk about the idea of the Central European Academy beyond the very tangible affiliation based on the logo of Christianity, of the common European history, the Polish-Hungarian common history? What else would you give as a main element of the mission, especially when you were talking about your own motivation and when you are doing your everyday networking, finding new members, new partners for our network? Do you see in the eyes of your future potential partners the same kind of Central European enthusiasm when you are talking about this mission? Do they realize, do they recognize that, oh, this is what I was searching for throughout my scientific career, to find a home for us Central Europeans? Do you see this happening or?
Yes, I do. And if I can start this explanation a little bit earlier, I already referred that in the past 30 years there something happened. First of all, there was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it was also a kind of end of the cooperation among the scientific communities of the social bloc. Because of course previously during the Soviet regime or under the Soviet regime, of course there was a cooperation among these nations scientific community, but after that everybody focused on Western societies and Western science. It's normal. They try to learn from Western colleagues.
The Western recipe.
Yeah, yes, you're right. We try to use it. We try to copy it. We consider this as a perfect recipe to our challenges. However, later we recognized that the importance of our similarities. You referred to the similar traditions, history, values, the role of religion in our life, and we recognized these, and we recognize also that we can learn from each other, and this is a really important part. You referred to the negotiation with other colleagues from other countries. Almost everybody in our network recognized it earlier than we started our job, and there was a kind of demand in connection as to this cooperation. but there was not a kind of fine answer, because typically the jurisprudence, the legal science is underfunded. Or if you can find a kind of financial sources, it's the topics, they are not close to our needs, to our interests, sorry if I use this word. Therefore, I think they waited for this program in a given sense.
Also, if I may add, it's somehow the mission and the way the Central European Academy realizes this mission. It also it's not static. It changes over time in different dimensions. What we've seen in the recent years, we've had some very beautiful developments. For example, as to the geographic scope of our activities, of our scientific activities. First of all, when we started the academy, we concentrated on the eight Central European neighbors here in the close neighborhood.
Yes, EU and non-EU members as well.
Exactly, but after some time we expanded. We have expanded this, let's say, club to include more EU candidate countries. So we moved even to Georgia, to North Macedonia, to look for potential
if you go on
partners.
the website, you can see the map and you can click on the countries cooperating.
Yes,
and it's an ever-expanding area.
That's true.
It's
the one dimension, let's say, and there is another one to deepen the existing cooperation.
Yes, it's
For
a
example,
parallel
it's
task.
a parallel task. The Polish-Hungarian cooperation is quite a good example for that. As you said, we have already started with quite a good relationship with the Polish scientific community, but it went with such a nice impetus and such a nice results that we have deepened that cooperation to create more and more like Polish-Hungarian bilateral projects, which also was quite a nice development.
It is one achievement to have new connections, but it's a more important task and challenge to treat these relationships and to have a long-term relationship which is ever deepening and deepening. And this is what you managed at the university, at the Central European Academy at the University of Miskolc. And Katarzyna, you are coming from Poland and you graduated in a different country, let's say far away from Budapest, far away from Hungary. What do you see? What is the unique character of this idea? You can see Central European titles all over the region. There are many, actually there are many foundations, research institutes, think tanks. What do you think is the specialty? Is it maybe filling a gap? Which was never filled up, or what do you see, especially from a Polish perspective?
I think it's a good expression, this filling the gap. That is what we are trying to do. Of course, Central European Academy is not the only research institute in Europe, in Central Europe. It's not the only place when legal scholars can carry out legal research. But as we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the goal of the academy is really specified by the law. So I think that's what gives it quite a serious anchorage.
A strong determination,
strong determination.
And destination as well.
Also this Central European direction, let's say, a focus.
Actually, I would like also to ask this question from Ede. How do you see the gap-filling potential or character of this academy?
For me, what is important, I previously determined the thematization and to represent our topics, our specific values and ideas, and our specific approaches into the international discourse of science. That is the point, because maybe there are also other institutions here in Central Europe, but in numerous cases they represent and they try to integrate the so-called Western approaches. I have to emphasize the Central European Academy is not against something, therefore we are not against Western values or something similar, but we are for something. We are trying to promote our own national topics, approaches, and so on and so on. That this is the gap filling mission of the Academy. It's a really nice story, and if I may add something to this topic, that the language, it always was a challenging point in our cooperation, because in this region there are so many national languages. And it was a essential question, the lingua franca,
Yes.
the common language. And finally, we chose English language. We can say that, that is the language of the international communication. However, as to the law, it's a really challenging language. It's a really challenging forum, because the specific legal orders of these nations is really far from the English legal order, but we use the language of another.
It's not easy to find the equation between the terms and definitions.
Yes, you're right.
Translated to English.
Yes, in a given sense, we are not translate, but we create.
We create.
We
Or
create the
describe.
words. Yeah, and we create the English words to describe our specific social affairs.
And when it comes to the, because there is a big amount of works translated continuously into English, and then it is also revised by professionals. Is the Central European English somewhat different from that of the Western European English in the research area?
As to the terminus technicus,
Like terminus technicus.
Yes,
Do
definitely.
you have to specifically ask for Central European English when you commission the professional translators, lecturers?
This cooperation also with the linguistic proofreaders.
So the proofreaders, yes, this is the
because
word I was searching for.
It's not so easy, because it's not only a one-way communication, but it's a cooperation between among the linguistic proofreaders and our scientists, and it's also a gap-filling project in this program, the language, the common language.
Yes, because if we want to be heard, if we want to be visible also for other parts of Europe and for other parts of the world, we need to use a language, we need to use a transmitter which everybody can understand.
I would refer to that diversity that we have among our researchers, professors, also young researchers. It is, I would call it a laboratory, maybe, or an incubator of the Central European cooperation is what we do. I do not know of any other similar place in Central Europe that would have a similar functional mission to bring together people with so many different Central European nationalities to be able to learn from each other and to learn how to enrich each other. So you may ask whether we are trying to create some Central European identity or establish a new thing. Then I would say that no, it's quite the opposite. We are trying to make stronger our national identities by meeting each other, by learning how valuable we are. But on the other hand, we can see from this meeting, from this encounter, from these encounters, that there is something that I would describe as the Central European consciousness.
Central European consciousness.
Yes, yes. Not the identity, but the consciousness that we share so much in common.
Actually, reading through the mission statement of the Academy on its website, and I really like the following sentence, among many others, that it aims to make the Central European legal tradition and jurisprudential achievements, which are an integral part of European values, as widely known as possible in Europe and beyond. But this is in the middle of the sentence. We have the message that I think all believe that Central European values are integral part of the whole European values. But sometimes the focus is not on us, and when we are talking about European values, sometimes it's the disproportional discussion. The inherited values coming from Central Europe are less actually mentioned, or the frequency of how these values are mentioned is less significant. And this is what I think the Central European Academy is trying to improve, to show the world that we are integral part. We've always been here with these values, which are integral part of the whole universe, European values. So, and Katarzyna, you already touched upon the issue of the Central European identity. So it's a question, do you think, is there something like Central European identity? Yes or not? If not, why not? Yes.
I share the opinion of Katarzyna in this way. And it's not the point for us, to create this kind of Central European identity or promote the creation of this. I think that here in Central Europe, we are Hungarians, Romanians, Serbians, Croatians, and so on and so on. However, what is a nice story to recognize that together we can reach maybe something valuable, something is useful for us. Therefore, recognition of common interest, I think this is really important. Mm-hmm. Not recognition of new identity, but recognition of our common interest. That is the goal here.
And we already mentioned that we are very strongly rooted in our local traditions, but at the same time, we are building international network in Central Europe. So how do you see, Katarzyna, how can this institute balance between these two characters? As I said, being at the same time local, serving the countries in the Central Eastern European region, and also being international, engaging international audience, scholars, and also we are disseminating our results globally. How can we find the right balance, being local and being global at the same time?
I think that we serve the local scientific communities by being international at the same time. So it's not the opposite. It's basically it's
complementary.
It's a complementary, and I would even say maybe two sides of the same coin. So by bringing together people from several different countries, we have already become very international. And we use the international lingua franca in our everyday communication, mm-hmm. and also in our scholarly work. And thanks to that, we are also visible and understandable for the scientific communities outside of Central Europe, because we use English and because we publish the results of our scientific research, which is focused on the local region, let's say. We publish them in English, so mm-hmm. We can share them. We can share the results. We can share the knowledge about our legal systems and our values outside Europe, outside Central Europe. Also, we use English in our conferences, and when we publish and disseminate the recordings of the conferences on our YouTube channel, we also do that in English. So we are international and visible also for the international community, and all that helps, I guess, I believe so, the region and our local societies, local scientific communities.
And how can you guarantee the constant quality of the language, of the professional language? Because you have to, comply with all kinds of resources, different, accents or different focuses in the translations. So how can you manage to have a a good quality, an excellent quality of the achievements of the products?
Linguistic proofreading, that is the answer, of course. Therefore, because as to in the Central European Academic Publishing, we use this service as a high-level one. It's, as you mentioned, it's essential to represent our ideas and our achievements at international level. This is the necessity, and this is my answer.
Before we jump to the next very dry session, and we are talking about facts and figures and data, but actually this is what makes us proud of the work done in the last couple of years. Let's touch upon the tradition and the community building aspects of the academy, and of course we should talk about the legal traditions in this regional historical legacies, how the CEA draw on legal tradition during its activity, and a very important question for the mission of the CEA, how local patriotism is embedded in the daily routine and activities and target setting of Central European Academy. We already talked about selfishly about our own local patriotism, being girls from or being children of Miskolc or students of Miskolc University, but I could feel that others' local patriotism is as much respected and supported when they are engaged with us, coming from other regions or other countries. So is it the right statement?
Yeah, you have raised a complex question, and
we have time.
Okay, because you referred also to the team building, community building issue, traditions, local patriotism. I try to provide an answer to these questions. First of all, you notice the community building. We already mentioned that is not a goal to create a so-called Central European identity. Okay. However, of course, these researchers, typically the young researchers in our projects, they are together, and of course, we would like to provide a framework for them how to cooperate. I think the community building is a real is a goal for us. And that's the traditions in connection with this, and that our University of Miskolc has a great traditions as to the community building. Taking into account is beautiful student customs. It's also under UNESCO protection with the national on the national list of the UNESCO. Katarzyna is
which are dated back to 1735 in Szemezbánya.
You are expert of this, of course.
Today Banska Štiavnica. Today,
and I think it's at that time it was important to provide community for different nations, and that is the situation nowadays. And this kind of traditions, they help us to create our own community building here.
And are these traditions embodied in dresses or
dresses,
events,
anthems? Originally,
anthems, music.
Yes, you're right. Absolutely, they are the traditions.
If someone is not affiliated with the Miskolc University, they have to know that we have very strong traditions. All faculties, we have anthems, traditional events, gatherings. So this is actually more than 200 years old custom at the University of Miskolc, and this is still very lively today. Sorry for this information.
No. You are right.
This is why it is worth coming to the University of Miskolc, and you are
yeah.
before this choice.
Yeah, because it's not only a place of education and research, but also a place of a community, of a real living community, living in a given sense traditional community, taking into account the customs. And these customs also serve as a kind of role model for the CEA how to build this community of Central European people and young researchers.
You have the yearbook habit. I really like it. This also helps actually for the traditions to survive, to have memories, to create memories.
And we have also cultural evenings. It's really
Cultural
important.
evenings.
Yeah, cultural evening.
What do you do during a cultural evening?
Many things, but for example, songs, dances, but the traditional ones from the given countries, it's important elements. They are essential elements of these cultural evenings, and of course their specific local meals. It's also part of the cultural evenings. I have to emphasize, of course, that here in the Central Europe we focus on research, and that is the main stream in our program. But additionally, these cultural evenings help to understand each other's in a better way.
Okay, and is the support for preserving local patriotism important for the academy?
It's important for I think it's important for our young researchers, and that is
so they are bringing this desire with them.
Yeah, of course, they are the master of these cultural evenings.
Okay. Katarzyna, do you want to address the different kinds of local patriotisms gathered under the umbrella of the Central European Academy work and researches? So if, for example, a young researcher would like to better deepen into a very, very special topic of that very nation, is it supported by the Academy, by the Research Directorate?
Well, first of all, there are several possibilities how to do research, how to do comparative legal research, which is one of the goals of the academy.
Yeah, this is the key, to compare.
To compare.
How we do.
And why we do it, and what are the best practices. So it's not a comparison without a reason, but it has a very special goal, how to make the legal systems better, how to find good solutions. And how to develop ourselves, and the existence and the representation of many different legal cultures and representatives of different legal systems within this network of several hundred of professors, as we have heard. So that creates already a first-hand opportunity to learn and to do a real research by just speaking with professors from other countries, other legal systems. The young researchers who are here in Budapest, can you imagine, they come here from their countries, from North Macedonia, from Poland, from Serbia, from Romania, and they stay here in Budapest. And they also can discuss do the debate, the scientific debate, during their everyday activities at the academy. That's why I said it's like a big laboratory, because they can learn from each other and teach each other, and that's what makes the local patriotism even stronger, I think.
And this is happening every day.
Yes,
at the institution. It's really amazing.
It's not visible from the street.
It's a living comparative law institution. Well, let's dive into the data and facts. And before I give the floor to Ede, because he's the master of these statistics, I'm always amazed when I'm listening to his presentation. When at the conference he presents or introduces CEA. I just would like to tell the audience that www.centraleuropeanacademy.hu is a very contentful website. You can see all kinds of activities, a wide range of products. You can also search on the faces and the personalities, the cooperating partners, also based on a map. So it's a very, very interactive website, and I'm very grateful for the colleagues to keep it alive every day. It's a huge work, but it shows also a great progress that maybe you can say that in less than 5 years from nothing, we get to somewhere, which Ede is going to tell about.
Maybe I'm going to start, and I'm going to also ask the help of my colleague Katarzyna. But I would like to start it that the financial sources, I think it's really important aspect of this structure and project, because we are financed from Hungarian national budget. And I have to emphasize that this is a great achievement. The colleagues from other countries, they are envy that we have this kind of project and program, and I think it's a really important message. Our university and the Central European Academy is financed from public budget. Therefore, of our achievements, they are transparent. They are open access.
Based on a contract made with the state and the university.
Yes, you're right. And you already mentioned our website, from which everybody can check it and enjoy it.
Yeah, and this is why I would like to ask you not to list here all those information which
you're
found,
right.
This public information on the website. But I ask you both picking those elements from the structure of Central European Academy, which are really important. And actually, the Central European Professors Network was the core idea to set up this network, and then every other features, every other elements, departments just came later into this project. So each of you can choose the topic you would like to
yes, maybe
describe.
Still, I would like to go back to the structure, the institutional structure, just to make some things clear. So the Central European Academy, it's maybe, let's say, it has a double structure. So from the one side, there is this management side, which we are not going to discuss, which is the
typical supportive administration.
Exactly. It's led by the general director. It's supported by the directorates for research, for legal matters, for financial matters. And there is this, let's say, networking side, the international cooperation side, which is built around the main pillars, the key projects that we run at the Central European Academy. And that is, first of all, the Professors Network project that you've just mentioned, which brings together scholars for doing research. There is the junior program, which is to support the young researchers. There are LLM programs and scholarships. There is also a publishing house. So there is quite a variety of different forms that coexist within the Central European Academy. Which make the academy both, let's say, an academic hub, and on the other side, platform for comparative international legal research. I would too start with the Professors Network, because that's the most emblematic and the first, chronologically, the first project of the Central European Academy that we are so proud of. It started as
the result of which is every year many of these beautiful books.
Many of the books, yes. We will maybe have a time to discuss the numbers as well. But the main idea of the Professors Network is to provide a framework for research, for international cooperation in research. Each year we launch several research groups, typically for legal scholars, professors, and senior researchers. But we do not limit ourselves only to, let's say, legal research. We have already had several interdisciplinary groups as well, in which we involved other experts like economists, politologists, engineers, or even military officers, if the topic required the combination of different areas of research. Each of the research group lasts for 1 year, and as a result, the results are visible. That's what we've been discussing, that we need to make ourselves visible. And typically the results include a book, articles, presentations at the international conferences, blog posts, dissemination events.
Yeah, because dissemination is key.
It's very important for us. That's true.
Because this open access character is also key in disseminating the results of the Central European Academy,
Yes.
because these books are not only physically accessible, but for almost, of course, everyone in the world who can just have an internet access. And in PDF format, you can find...
On our webpage, you can find
website.
each and every book, also journal, in PDF form and also in the EPUB format for the e-books.
Okay, you can maybe repeat
so
this
you can-
abbreviation so that
EPUB.
non-scholars can
EPUB,
also,
yes,
which is
the abbreviation used for e-books. The
E-books.
format is a specific format for
Okay.
the e-books. And of course, all that in English.
And what is your favorite book? Which one?
My favorite book, it's hard to say. I have several of them.
Which is the closest to your heart? Either because it's your specific domain,
Yes,
or
I
you
would,
participated in it, or
I would choose that one because it has the longest title.
I show it
Which,
for the
reads-
others.
Shielding Europe with the Common Security and Defense Policy. Quite an
Yes,
actual
that's the
topic.
Main, that's the main topic. It was about the EU legal framework for the development of innovative European defense industry.
And sorry to interrupt you here, Kasia, but Ede, you may tell us about this subtitle here, because it's a special series among the Professors Networks edition, because here we find an extra title,
Yeah, you're right.
which says, on the occasion of the Hungarian presidency of the Council of the European Union. So what kind of book is this?
In 2024, there was a presidency as to the European level in the European Union, in which Hungary has the role of presidency, and we say, yeah, thank you so much, and we selected the topics of the Hungarian presidency, and we focused on that topics. We analyzed the priorities of the Hungarian presidency that were in the focus of our research. For example, the common defense, and especially the industrial questions, innovation, and so on. The economic governance, also demography, and as an important connected topic, migration questions, and also the supranationalization of the rule of law. Therefore, we focused on these topics, we presented them, we published them.
This is one of the achievements which can be very proud of. And what was the reception among the other member states of those books when they, ministers in the council, they received this book? What was the feedback?
There were some meetings in connection with demography, and I think also the General Affairs.
The General Affairs Council.
Unfortunately,
European Ministers' Council.
Yeah, you're right, but unfortunately,
I know them.
I could not visit exactly the meeting when these books were presented. However, we have a similar opportunity in connection with the Demography Council. That our books about demography, they were presented.
One of the flagship
priorities,
topics of the Hungarian presidency.
Therefore, I can present only the reactions of the professors and the scientific community, but it was really good, and I was also, in a given sense, part of the Common Security and Defense Policy mission. It was really interesting because it was not only about the legal scholars, and it's not only the contribution of legal scholars, but also military officers, engineers. They were involved in this project. And they, as far as I know, the other contributor also used this book, and they also considered it as a really important achievement. Maybe this book is also used in the hands of experts of common defense.
We hope so.
We hope so.
If, dear audience, you have enough free time, just go on the website and you can easily read any of our books. They are valuable contributions to the actual trends and the policy making based on the trends which are important for Central Europe. And the demographic challenge in our region is equally important. And you can read beautiful thesis works from great professors.
Yeah, not only
from
lawyers,
this region. Not only lawyers,
but also demographists,
yeah.
sociologists, psychologists, economists about demography. It's a real cooperation among the different fields.
Yes, and since its establishment, as we already heard, almost 200 professors contributed to
let's
the
talk
books.
about numbers.
And it means from 15 different countries. So
15 different countries.
When you take a look at the books, at these books,
Yes.
you can imagine that really is the essence of the
It looks like
knowledge, let's say, and experience from scholars representing really quite.
So how many professors or legal scholars are contributing to the production of a book like this, either as an author, either as a lecturer, either
of course,
proofreader?
Depends on the topic, and because maybe there are smaller projects with as author and reviewers maybe 15-20 per book, but there are huger ones with 50 or maybe more contributors.
So what would you answer if I ask you to give me the exact number of those legal scholars from Central Europe who in any quality already got affiliated with our activities, not only as contributors to books, but all in all? So what would be the number? I know you can never answer my questions with a number or because it's not easy, I can understand, but just to give a volume, a magnitude.
As I noticed that, for example, in the previous academic year, there were more than 400 professors and researchers in our project. How can you imagine this amount of professors and researchers? In Hungary, we have eight faculties of law, and the number of professors and researchers with scientific degree is similar. Therefore, we operate here in the Central European Academy. We manage the research activity of a similar amount of professors as the amount of the professors in our Hungarian faculties of law.
But what is the proportion of those participants between the foreigners, like coming from other Central European countries, and the Hungarian researchers?
I think that maybe the maximum is 10% of the researchers, they are Hungarians.
But this reflects also the reality.
Yes, you're
numbers,
right. You're right.
You count 15 states.
And we also have a number in connection with our publishing houses, because we have professors and authors from 100 and maybe 20 universities. Therefore, the affiliations of the authors in our books in the past 5 years, it's 120 universities. Okay. They were affected by our project. I think it's a proper number.
Because I think we talked quite a lot about the Professors Network, which is the backbone of our activities. What about the junior program and the LLM programs?
If the Professors Network is the backbone of the present project, in this case, the future of our project, this is the junior program, because this is about the young researchers. In our projects, they are the young researchers. They are also PhD program in the University of Miskolc, and in addition to this, they are also researchers in the Central European Academy. We involved more than 50 young researchers into our project. We started it also 5 years ago. Therefore, we have already our first graduated colleagues.
How many years does it take?
After 4 years, because for a young researcher, this is 4 academic year. And this project is really international. In which way? The students, they are from this region. At this moment, we have students from 11 countries. Their supervisors are also from this region. We have also 11 countries represented in our program via their supervisors. And the course materials prepared for this program, it also prepared by the professors of this region.
So we are also building the material.
Yes, absolutely. We have now
not only the people, but also
13 volumes in this project, because especially the first 2 years is really strict for the young researchers. They have compulsory lectures and they have compulsory exams, of course focusing on Central European comparative law.
So this is another type of our books,
that
actually.
Is.
So this is the learning material.
Yeah, that is.
For the program.
Yes.
I also show it to the audience. It's a different
cover,
style with different cover,
cover,
also showing the different use, because this is the learning material where they actually make the exams from. They have to take part in lessons.
Yeah, as to this series, also approximately 200 professors were involved to prepare these course materials. Therefore, this is a really valuable one. It's a nice moment that these books are used not merely, however, in our program, but there are other universities in which these books are already applied.
If I may add, the primary goal of this book series, Legal Studies on Central Europe, was to provide...
It's a typical title.
One of the volumes.
International Law from a Central European Perspective.
Exactly. Thank you. And its main goal is to provide course materials for the PhD students from the Central European Comparative Law PhD program. But I also warmly recommend it to all legal scholars, not only PhD students. So it was created with that idea that it's a good way to provide also some deeper knowledge stemming from comparative legal research, not only to students but also for the legal community.
The books, they are really essential and they are really cardinal issues. However, I have to emphasize another outcome of this program, that our young researchers, they can be employed, or now they are already employed in other universities, also abroad. Therefore, we have young researchers in this way employed in other universities in Hungary, in Serbia, in Croatia, in Slovakia, also in Romania, also in Poland. I think this is a really valuable outcomes of this program, that they can spread this network, this approach in other countries.
It's a great cooperation in many quality. You have the chance to participate, and irrespective of the very role what you have to play in a book, you will be affiliated with that circle immediately, and this is the networking itself which really matters.
Yes, you're right, and you noticed and you mentioned the professors of this region, but I also have to emphasize the practitioners, because numerous justices, not merely from national courts, constitutional courts, but also from international courts, they are involved, and they deliver presentation in our project, not merely in young researcher project, but also in another project.
What shall we know about the publishing house? Why is it called a house?
The publishing house, when at the beginning Katarzyna mentioned that the CEA it's a research institute, I thought that it's a traditional classic research institute, but with international publishing house.
And it sounds better.
I hope. I hope so. However,
like the publisher,
publishing
house. I really like the name, but is there a reason for that?
Yes.
For this choice?
As to the science and sciences, the international publishing houses they have a very, very important role, and unfortunately for us, scientists of this region, typically the international publishing houses, they connect it to other parts of the world. And if we would like to publish our topics, our approaches, our achievements, we always have to, how can I say it, convert it in a given way, to be published, or we can publish topics or approaches which can be interesting for them. And therefore, this framework of an international publishing house was a really, really essential via which we can present and represent our ideas, which are important for nations of our countries, which are useful for them, to catch the essential topics, essential for us. Therefore, the publishing house is important to represent ourselves.
And what do you do with the books? How do you send them to different libraries, universities? Is it easy to put on the shelves of the, I don't know, Court of Human Rights library, a book of the Central European Academy?
First of all, nowadays, of course, the digital version is really important. Digitalization, it's important part of the business, and it's really important that our books and journal, they are open access. Nowadays, at international level, the open access journals they are not rare. However, open access books, it's a little bit different. There are different policies. I think it's also unique that we provide all of our books in this way. Second, I think that nowadays the printed version is also important, and of course you also try to send them, especially to the libraries of the most important places which are important of law, of concerning law. We are trying to send them also to the libraries of the international courts. Sometimes it's challenging, because they also have problems with their capacities and other things. But we are really proud of the situation that our books already can be found in the libraries of the International Court of Justice, or in the Luxembourg Court, therefore Court of Justice of the EU, or for example European Court of Human Rights. You can find there. The researchers also can find there in their libraries.
So is it possible that I
Yes.
come across, for example, at the international conference with an international court judge from, I don't know, France, and I can recommend him to
Yes, definitely.
go to his library at his workplace?
It's an interesting question, because
Strasbourg.
sometimes when we try to transfer our books to given libraries, a given number of libraries, they are open to receive books, a given number of libraries not. We have some experience when given countries' libraries, they were not as open for the Central European books.
And they have this freedom to choose and to refuse, for example, to accept
Yes.
some of those books?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so they're free to choose.
Yes.
But actually, as far as I'm informed, we managed to put on the shelves of our books
Yes.
of many important legal institutions
And libraries.
in Western Europe as well.
So, for example, you can find books with the stamp of the Court of the Luxembourg, Central European
Wow.
publishing books in the Court of Justice of the European Union.
And they can all get acquainted with the Castle of the Ocean.
Yes, you're right.
This is, for me, the most important part of this mission. So let's talk about the journals of the Central European Academy, which are also of strategic importance, because this is the forum where we can be heard and we can write about your own legal heritage. We can show the diversity in English language. So there are 2 types of those journals.
Now there are 3 types.
You are very fast in
you're
evolving.
You're right.
I think
First of all,
there is on the shelf this green one.
Yeah, you're right.
Please show it.
Yeah, that was.
This is my favorite.
Yeah.
Low identity and values. Very
Yeah.
telling name.
Yes. it's true. Now we have 3 journals. The one of them is the Central European Journal of Comparative one and the Law, Identity and Values. Nowadays, the science is really article and journal focused. This is a fact. That is the reason why in the Central European
almost blog focused.
Yeah, and nowadays, taking into
ever faster world.
Yes, this accelerating world, and therefore the journals have a really big importance. However, I have to also emphasize that for us in Central European academic publishing, the young researchers, they are also really important, and they also have their own student-run journal. For example, this Central European Academy Law Review. The young researchers, they are the managing team of this journal. The editor-in-chief is also a young researcher. And via this, for example, via this project, via this journal, they can learn how to operate a professional scientific journal. However, if I may refer something, previously you noticed or you had a questions in connection with local patriotism, and I think it's a nice aspect of this local patriotism that on the cover of the journal we put the buildings, paintings. This one is from Slovakia, from Bratislava, the Pan-European University building, the Faculty of Law. And we try to promote and we try to express our respect to the other scientific communities in this way. I think it's a nice moment. At this moment, this paintings was represented. This faculty building was represented because the editor-in-chief of the journal, she graduated in that university.
Yeah, symbolism is very important. It's key. Everything is linked to every element in this structure. So, Katarzyna, what would you think it's also important to mention about the data and facts of the Central European Academy, about the events maybe, which are the most important events,
So the calendar of the Central European Academy is quite busy one. We have really lots of different kinds of events. All of them, of course, are academic events, but of different kinds. We have conferences which are connected to the Professors Network project. We also have conferences which are dedicated and which serve the promotion of the given books. Also, it's a part of dissemination of the results. But we also have some, I would say, symbolic or emblematic conferences that we organize annually to establish some kind of tradition or custom. And these conferences, somehow they represent the main focus of our scientific activities. One of these conferences is the annual scientific conference for young researchers. It takes place every year, typically during the autumn, at the beginning of the academic year. And it gathers around 170, 180 participants.
From different countries?
From different countries. Last year, I think maybe we had
it's like a big jamboree
from 30 countries, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a big jamboree.
It looks like a big jamboree,
Yes.
to gather all the professors, juniors, everyone.
It's for young researchers especially important, but also for their supervisors and the professors to meet with such a wide community of young researchers. Each of these young researchers have their own panel during the conference and invites other young researchers from other countries. So each of them manages like a small part of the conference. There is another one, another emblematic conference, International Children's Rights Days. It's a very touching conference, and also personally that's my favorite one. it's an interdisciplinary conference when experts dealing with children from very, very different perspectives come together and discuss how to truly understand children and the needs of children. And each year we have a different focus of this, let's say, of the children's rights topic. Last year it was the children's mental health, for example.
But here we have to mention, sorry to interrupt you, Katarzyna, that one of our LLM programs is focused on children's rights. And so this is not by accident that one of the pearls of our events is the International Children's Rights Day, because we are actually tackling this topic within our LLM program as well, which is very unique, actually. In Hungary, maybe Ede can talk about it a bit, because we forgot to mention within the LLM programs the importance of this children's rights element.
Yes, and the third emblematic conference, it's also connected to the other LLM course that we support at the CEA, that is the Human Rights Days. It's a conference also dedicated for all those who are willing to deepen their knowledge, theoretical knowledge, but also, let's say, practical experience, and to meet other experts who are dealing with human rights. That's also a big, important part of networking.
May I interrupt you in this sense? It was a beautiful moment that in this year, as to the Human Rights Days, if I'm correct, 7 justices of the European Court of Human Rights are represented the Strasbourg Court. It was so unique situation that the president of Hungary also invited them to visit the residence of the president. Katarzyna, she mentioned these scientific and professional programs. However, we always try to give another aspect, another valuable characteristic to this program. For example, as to the Young Researchers Conference, we also provide opportunity for so-called guest nations, scientific communities. Therefore, of course, in the panels there are young researchers from different countries connected to the topics of our young researchers. However, we also invite guest nations. In this year, the guest nation is going to be Slovakia. Of course, the previous guest nations, Poland, Serbia, Croatia, they are here. But in this year, the newcomer is going to be the Slovakian scientific community. Or as to the Children's Rights Days, I think it's a nice moment that we also try to present good practices of our Central European countries. Of course, there are so many challenges and lacks in our children's rights systems. However, I think it's also really important to promote good practices as well. In this year, for example, Croatia is going to be the guest nation, and we try to promote their educational system connected to children's rights, which is really nice, and I think we can promote it.
Having heard all this, you must be very busy. So it's a huge job done in the background, and we are all grateful for our colleagues that they are managing this magnitude and the frequency of the event.
As Ede mentioned, it's brilliant teamwork.
It's a brilliant teamwork.
Yeah, and I have to mention that the role of the chief director, Professor Timea Barzo, it's really essential in this project. She is about to provide the proper background for professors and young researchers. Therefore, Professor Barzo and her team in this job is cardinal.
As we are slowly approaching the final session of this episode, I would like to ask you a question which is in connection with a statement which I often hear in the media from politicians, when they say that Europe's future lies in Central Europe. Do you agree with this, especially being experts from this region, especially dealing with the networking and preservation of the legal heritage of Central Europe? Do you agree that the dynamism of this region is key for the European future? Or
I cannot imagine a European future without a Central European cooperation. That is a little bit that I modified maybe the answer, not the same to the proper question, but yeah.
Kasia, how do you see the outlook for CEA in this respect?
In that aspect, in that in connection with that, it's really the first and most important thing is to rediscover ourselves and to rediscover the Central European connections, all that we share in common. In that case, I think Central Europe has its future, and we as the Central European Academy can even contribute to make it more feasible.
So let's give some summary messages for the audience. What would be your summary in 2-3 sentences? What they should memorize, what they should know about the Central European Academy? If they are not legal scholars, if they are coming from a different profession, if they are not from Central Europe, what would be the message for them to take?
I can give you a message, but that message is not my own one. It's not my own message, but
copyright for someone.
I believe it's public, and I also will mention the author of these words. I've heard once quite a nice, let's say, expression, characteristics of the Central Europe. That Central Europe is the maximum diversity in a minimum space. And these are the words of Milan Kundera. He was well-known Czech writer and essayist. And that's something to be remembered, I think, that we are all very colorful here in Central Europe. We all share many things in common, but there are also many things that are challenging for us, like our history, also the history with our closest neighbors. But maybe the good way to still learn how to live next to each other is to get to know each other, and that is one of the reasons why Central European Academy is for. And I hope that our listeners, our watchers, will have time and opportunity to visit our web page to see what we are doing, and maybe also they can contribute to that that diversity and that colorfulness of Central Europe.
Or maybe visit some of our events and to experience in person the true CEA.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe my message in connection with this, that we nations here in Central Europe, we have to be also proud of our achievements, because there are so great ones. If I may refer only on one of them, it is the UN Convention of Children's Rights. This is the international convention signed by so many countries, maybe the most popular, if I can use this word, international convention all around the world. Only one country which is not exactly the full member of this cooperation. And the text of this convention was prepared by a Central European country, definitely Poland, and that was the country which initiated it. I think it's a nice achievement of our region. Therefore, we have to be proud of our achievements. That is my message. And if I may give another one, what was a great recognition for me, that we speak so many languages. However, our way of thinking is so similar in this region. It's interesting.
That's a very good closing remark, and I would like to thank you again for my colleagues, Dr. Katarzyna Zombory, the Director of Research, and Professor Ede Szilágyi, the Strategic Director at the Central European Academy. Dear audience, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you for being a hero and listening to us to this during this very long discussion, but I hope you found it valuable. And I also would like to invite you to follow the other episodes of the Central European Legal Insights. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Central European Legal Insights. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels for updates. To discover more conversations from the series, be sure to explore our other episodes. Thank you for listening.